Welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazier, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at Yamaha's all-new YZ490 for 1986. Now, this YZ was completely redesigned this year in every way but one. I guess it did get upgrades in terms of the transmission. It went from a 4-speed to a 5-speed, which is a big improvement. Certainly if you're going to use this vehicle off-road, which a lot of people were. The 490, it had a great deal of its appeal was its versatility. It was a great off-road machine. There was no radiators to worry about braking or anything like that. Motocross-wise, obviously it was kind of falling behind the curve of the latest technology from some of the competition. Honda had went liquid cooling in 85. Kawasaki added the KIP system here in 86. So there was definitely a lot more technology on their machines, but I mean, the 490 was certainly not slow. A good buddy of mine had the 87 version, almost the identical machine to this 86, and it was still stupid powerful. It was crazy powerful. The one thing I did remember most about it was how much it vibrated, though. Good Lord, the power band's kind of unique in these 490s, and it's not like that grunty low-end power you expect from a 500. It really had kind of more of a softer low end, and then it really hit hard in the mid-range and revved really high. And the problem was, if you use that power like that, it would like numb your hands in like, you know, a minute or two. The thing just vibrated so much, it was kind of crazy, but it had plenty of power. There's no lack of power in this bike. It was plenty fast. I don't think any of these 500s were slow by any means, and the average Joe probably wasn't looking for more power than this thing put out. It really was. Didn't have the cachet, and mainly it was I guess the response and the livability of the bike. These 490s had issues with jetting. They tend to ping on pump gas. They were just kind of not as refined as some of the competition at the time. But I think depending on what you were looking for out of your 490 or you're out of your 500, what you were looking to do with the bike, if you wanted a machine that was good off-road and the occasional motocross, take it out in the desert and play, was a good alternative to maybe the more advanced but certainly more finicky to work on competition. Now, if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos I've done. I've done retrospectives on many other machines, other 500s, the history of the CR500, KX500, off-road, ATV. There's a little bit of everything on my channel. And if you're into this kind of content, make sure you check it out. Share with your friends on social media. I would very much appreciate it. If you like to support what I do have Motocross Vault merch available. I do have a YZ490 design that was based on the 85 machine, but I'd love to do something for 86 or a bike you have. I'm happy to do a custom order for you as well, to kind of do something special. If somebody's looking for a certain bike with their number on or something, just hit me up on Twitter and DM me here on Instagram or wherever else you follow me, and I'm happy to see if I can help you out in the future. So here, without further ado, is a look back at Yamaha's 1986 YZ490. In 1985, Yamaha pulled off one of the most impressive upsets in motocross history when Brock Glover bested David Bailey in the Powerhouse Factory Honda squad on his nearly stock Yamaha YZ490. The year before, Yamaha made the surprising decision to abandon their costly works bike program in favor of racing production-based machines in the United States. This was at a time before the production rule, when all the race teams were campaigning one-off prototype machines that shared very little with what the consumers could find on the showroom floor. Brock's air-cooled production 490 cost a mere fraction of the exotic liquid-cooled RC500s campaigned by David Bailey, but somehow the Golden Boy prevailed. At the time, the production YZ490 was not even the best stock bike in the 500 division. Its air cooling and 4-speed transmission put it at a distinct disadvantage against the liquid-cooled 5-speed powerhouses offered by Honda, KTM, and Kawasaki. All three offered less vibration, more consistent jetting, and longer-lasting power. The YZ's stock suspension was also very poor, with wimpy springs, poor damping, and a wicked propensity to kick in the rough. Off-road riders liked the rugged simplicity and reliability of the Yamaha's air-cooled motor, but found its 4-speed transmission limiting. Glover's 85 500 championship gave Yamaha's PR department a lot to crow about, but any realistic assessment of the stock YZ490 pointed to a machine in serious need of an upgrade. After taking drubbings in all the major shootouts in 1985, Yamaha went back to the drawing board for 1986. The YZ490 adopted an all-new chassis with additional gusseting, stronger tubing, and a repositioned rear suspension system. The redesigned monocross rear end lowered the shock's position on the chassis, moved the linkage to below the swing arm, and placed the damper at a more upright angle. A new swing arm was stronger and featured new mounting to accommodate the repositioned shock. An all-new damper was spec'd the Yamaha claimed was designed by their partner Öhlins. The new Öhlins-style shock was built for Yamaha by Showa and continued to employ Yamaha's unique brake-actuated suspension system to reduce compression damping under braking. Overall travel was set at 12 inches, with a full range of compression and rebound adjustments available. Up front, the YZ490 continued to use a set of 43mm conventional Kiaba damper rod forks. At the time, these were considered quite stout and were the same size of silverware found on all the Japanese full-size machines. In 1985, these forks had been dismal performers. So for 1986, Yamaha dialed up all new internals to improve their action. Unlike Honda's new Showa forks, the YZ retained a traditional damper rod to handle its oil flow within the forks. At the time, Yamaha did not feel the additional cost of Honda's work-style cartridge damping system was worth the gain in performance. While the YZ did not get Honda's new wave washers, it did receive all new valving that increased the compression damping by 10% and bumped up the rebound control by 15%. The spring rates within the forks were also increased for 1986. Internally, the forks were also upgraded by adding an alumite coating to the sliders. This ultra-hard coating reduced friction and lessened particulate contamination of the oil from erosion of the sliders. Total travel was set at 12 inches, with external adjustments available for air pressure and compression damping only. Paired with the all-new chassis was redesigned bodywork that improved the ergonomics greatly. In 1985, the YZ490 featured a low-slung riding position that made it a chore to get out of its giant marshmallow of a saddle and difficult to slide forward in turns. While none of the 85 500 class were anything close to svelte, the 490's wide bodywork, scooped-out seat, and pudgy tank made it feel more heavy and unwieldy than its 230 pounds would have indicated. For 1986, Yamaha slimmed down and flattened out the riding position with an all-new seat, tank, and side panels. The new tank offered a 0.4-gallon increase in fuel over 1985 while still featuring a slimmer profile at the seat-tank juncture. The repositioned shock allowed Yamaha to redesign the airbox and reshape the side plates for a sleeker midsection as well. The all-new seat was slightly shorter to match the shape of the new tank, but featured a flatter profile on top to facilitate easier rider movement. The front and rear fenders looked identical to 85, but the rear did feature a slight upgrade to work with the redesigned frame. Up front, an all-new disc brake reduced the size of the rotor to make it less vulnerable to damage, while a redesigned twin-piston caliper offered increased bite through the use of grippier pads. In the rear, the YZ continued to employ an old-school drum for braking duties. A new front wheel finally eliminated the failure-prone Z-spokes Yamaha had had on their YZs since 1984. On the motor front, Yamaha took a conservative approach in 1986. By this point, both Honda and Kawasaki had moved to liquid cooling for their open-class machines, with Kawasaki even adding their variable exhaust valve KIPS system to the biggest KX. At the time, Yamaha claimed both advances were unnecessary expenses on a 500. They believed that 500s already had too much power for most riders, and that the added complexity, cost, and weight of liquid cooling and a power valve system were just not justified in a low-volume product. While the new YZ490 did not receive the smaller YZ's Yamaha power valve system and liquid cooling for 86, it did adopt several changes aimed at improving its versatility and performance. The most dramatic of these upgrades was an all-new transmission that finally added a fifth gear to the big YZ. The new cog box tightened up the ratios and improved the YZ's versatility away from the track. The top end remained steel-lined and air-cooled, which many off-roaders appreciated. That meant the cylinder could be bored in the event of a seizure, and there were no radiators to smash or boil over. Changes for 86 included an all-new cylinder casting, with reinforcements around the base to improve sealing and prevent the cracking around the cylinder studs that had plagued some earlier 490s. Revamped porting, a deeper breathing airbox, and all-new fiber reeds aimed to beef up low to mid-range power for 1986. The carburetor remained a massive 40mm round slide McCuney that Yamaha felt provided a smoother power delivery than some of the newer flat slide mixers. The bore, stroke, and displacement remained unchanged from 85, with the YZ clocking in at 487 cc's of displacement. On the track, the revamped YZ490 was a substantially improved machine in almost every way. The new layout was more comfortable, with more of a sit-on feel than previous 490s. Despite clocking in at the same weight as 1985, the new slimmer bodywork and improved riding position made the revamped 490 feel substantially lighter on the track. The flatter seat and narrower tank made it easier to move forward and weight the front end in turns as well. This aided cornering, and the YZ was plenty happy to dive to the inside line if available. It was not as nimble in the twisties as carvers like Honda's CR, but at speed, the YZ was also far less anxiety-inducing than the Red Machine. Once you dialed up its new fifth gear, the YZ was rock solid and rarely shook its head. Airing the Yamaha out was more pleasant as well, with its improved ergonomics. It was still a big and very powerful bike, but the updated chassis and bodywork did wonders to make the size and power more manageable. On the suspension front, the 86 490 was a significant upgrade over the previous season. The redesigned Motocross rear suspension provided a much better ride in the rough and no longer bottomed out and kicked sideways on hard hits. The stock spring was in the ballpark for most riders, and the Öhlins design shock did a very good job of taking the bite out of the track. Big hits and small chop were taken in stride, and it offered one of the smoothest and most well-sorted rides in the class. The BAS system remained, but most riders felt it did very little to affect the shock's performance. Overall, it was the best performing Yamaha open class shock in a decade. Up front, the story was not quite as rosy for the new YZ. The revamped KYB forks were much improved over the dismal 85 versions, but still a significant step down from the Honda's excellent Showa cartridge units. The stiffer springs and revamped valving were far more resistant to bottoming, but their action remained disappointing overall. Big hits were taken well, but the forks were harsh and choppy on small obstacles. Sharp ledges and braking bumps that the Honda virtually ignored were transmitted directly to the rider's wrists on the Yamaha. With some spring and oil weight fiddling, their action improved somewhat, but they were never going to be as plush and comfy as the more advanced forks found on the CR. For most riders, the biggest bone of contention with the new YZ490 was its very old-school motor. The decision to eschew liquid cooling saved Yamaha some development dollars, but it also led to several compromises in its performance. By going to liquid cooling, the YZ's rivals were able to use tighter tolerances within the motor, run higher compression, and jet their carburetors more precisely. The wide temperature changes an air-cooled motor endured during a long moto made it difficult to jet it properly, and this hindered the YZ's performance. If you jetted it to run cleanly when cold, then you risked seizing the motor once it got hot. The motor's internal parts also tended to expand and contract more than in a temperature-controlled top end, so the engineers had to factor in these variations when they designed the cylinder, piston, rings, and head. For many years, riders had held that liquid cooling was unnecessary on an open bike, but the eye-opening performance of the new liquid-cooled CR500 and KX500 had most riders rethinking this stance in 1986. Both these half-liter beasts pumped out an incredible amount of power, and it did it with a better response and more consistent performance. Unlike an air-cooled machine, the liquid-cooled 500s maintained their performance the entire moto and ran the same on lap 15 as they did on lap 1. With Yamaha sticking to air cooling for 1986, the big YZ started with some inherent disadvantages. Most notable of these was its erratic jetting, which hindered throttle response down low and led to a concerning detonation once the motor was hot. Off idle, the YZ felt very rich and reluctant to clean out. This sluggish low-end response made the YZ less explosive when you first twisted the throttle than the arm-stretching Honda and Kawasaki, and some less skilled riders appreciated its less abrupt delivery. Once the YZ cleaned out, it pulled very strongly into a healthy mid-range hit and eye-watering top-end surge. Its power band was highly unorthodox for a 500 single, with much less bottom and a longer and stronger pull on top than its rivals. At its absolute peak, it produced about 2 horsepower less than the red and green machines, but most riders did not mix the extra ponies. Once the YZ was on the pipe, it was as fast as anything else in the class, but its blubbery low-end jetting made it a bit unpredictable at times. Sometimes it took a beat or two to clean out before the big yammer exploded with a massive dose of forward thrust. Its mid and up power band was unique, and most riders found it was best to keep it in the mid-range to avoid the gurgling low-end and hand-numbing vibration on top. If you did hold the throttle on, the YZ pulled well past the point where the Honda and Kawasaki were asking for a shift. Once the YZ got hot, there was a noticeable drop in power that was not present on the liquid-cooled rivals. For many riders, this was not an issue, as the drop in power matched their late moto drop in strength. Jeff Stanton types missed the added power, but most average Joes probably counted the power loss as a bonus. Once the 490 was hot, it also tended to ping quite a bit, so leaning out the jetting to get rid of the burble down low was not the best idea. Running race gas and having the head modified were the only real solutions for this rattle and ping problem. Once the head was modified and the jetting was sorted, the 490's motor could be very effective. It was plenty fast for most mortals, and the new 5-speed was a better fit for the YZ's mid and up power band. The transmission and clutch were not particularly smooth in their engagement, but the broad power of the 490 tended to put less stress on their action than on the higher-strung YZ125 and 250. Most tracks could be ridden in 2 or 3 gears, and riders rarely felt the need to hammer the clutch out of every turn. Keeping the big 490 a gear high and smoothly rolling on the throttle were the best ways to get it hooked up and keep the big single from rattling your fillings out of your teeth. On the detailing front, the 490 was well sorted for its time. The new airbox was easy to service, and the lack of a power valve and liquid cooling made working on its top end a snap. There were no radiators to worry about smashing in a fall, and the motor was generally very reliable, aside from its propensity to ping when hot. As a bonus, the 490 was also the easiest of the big open-class Japanese machines to start. The kicker did not put your leg at a weird angle, and it was far easier to get it lit than the occasionally finicky Honda. Jetting the stock 490 was a nearly impossible task. If you leaned it out to stop the gurgle, then you ran the risk of running it too lean once it got hot. For most riders, it was best to err on the rich side until you got the head fixed. Without water jackets to dampen the ringing of the fins, the YZ was also substantially louder than its rivals, and there was no escaping the vibration from that paint bucket-sized piston. That constant vibration also liked to loosen all the YZ's nuts and bolts, so keeping an eye on everything was a good idea if you wanted to keep the rattling under control. Riders praised the new layout, and the YZ was comfortable aside from the bend in the stock bars. They received a serious thumbs down for their swept-back shape and butter-soft construction. The grips were also panned for their hard rubber and appetite for chewing palms. The throttle pull for the massive McCuny was stiffer than some of the YZ's rivals, but the controls and switchgear were generally comfortable and of good quality. The new decals were handsome, but the mismatched red number plate on the front seemed like a rather odd addition to some. The lack of a removable rear subframe made shock servicing more of a pain than on the Honda, and if you looped out the YZ and bent things up, it was not as easy as just bolting on a new rear section. The small front rotor did not seem to hinder the YZ's front braking, but the rear drum was noticeably less powerful than the rear disc found on Kawasaki's new KX500. Overall, the 1986 YZ490 turned out to be a surprisingly competitive open-class racer. Despite its relative lack of technology, the big 490 was more than capable of winning against its more advanced rivals. The air-cooled motor continued to have its limitations, but its chassis layout and suspension were much improved. The 5-speed transmission helped make the most of its power and finally upped its versatility off-road. Many less experienced pilots preferred the YZ's mellower delivery to the over-the-top explosive hit and eye-watering acceleration of the Honda and Kawasaki. Both of those machines were certainly faster than the Yamaha, but very few pilots had the skill, strength, and guts to put all of those excess ponies to the track. With a Simmons anti-cav kit for the forks, a bit of head massaging, a rejet, and some race gas, the mighty 490 had what it took to win at any level. Its ringing fins, vibrating motor, and old-fashioned looks were never going to win over the latest and greatest crowd, but if you were looking for a fun, reliable, versatile, and easy-to-work-on machine, then the all-new YZ490 was certainly worth a look in 1986. So there you have it. That's a look back at the all-new 1986 YZ490, a machine that was certainly maybe a little behind the competition in terms of outright maximum technology, but in terms of performance, it wasn't a really huge step behind. I mean, Jeff Stanton took basically a stock YZ490 to second in the 500 Nationals in 1987. It was plenty fast enough to win. I don't think, you had too much trouble getting the kind of power you need to win. Obviously, it's not going to probably run as crisply as a liquid cooled machine would at the time, but in terms of just outright power, the 490 was plenty powerful to get the job done. It was a beast of a machine. They're still fun bikes. Like I said, they're very versatile, great off-roaders. If you're looking for a machine that was good at not just motocross, the YZ490 was probably a pretty good choice here in 1986. If you like this sort of thing, please make sure you check out the other videos I've done. If you can share the channel on social media, I would very much appreciate it as well. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazier for the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.